Welcome to Femme Fantasy, where transformation, elegance, and self-discovery come to life. I suppose every story of change begins with something small, though at the time it rarely feels that way. For me, it started on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind of day I used to think stretched endlessly ahead of me, routine, predictable, and as comfortable as an old cardigan. I was 62 then, still working part-time as a senior office coordinator at Harrow and Finch Consulting, a place where the wallpaper hadn't changed since the mid-90s, but the expectations seemed to evolve every week. I had spent 35 years there, longer than some of our new analysts had been alive, and I knew every creaking drawer, every flickering light, every quiet sigh the building made when the heating clicked on. And yet, I didn't know myself. Not really. Not in the way I would soon learn. That Tuesday morning I arrived early, as I always did, slipping in before the younger staff filled the hallways with their clattering cups and fast conversations. The sky was still dim, the kind of gray that London does too well, and the office hummed with the low whir of idle computers. I took my coat off, hung it neatly by the door, and paused when I caught my reflection in the small mirror above the coat rack. I looked tired, not just physically, but somewhere deeper. There was a weariness behind my eyes, a long-held tension I had never bothered to name. It surprised me how sharply it struck me that morning. I leaned in slightly, brushing a stray bit of lint off my cheek. The fluorescent lights overhead did me no favors, but it wasn't about that. It was about the feeling that something inside me had been inching closer to the surface, something I had spent decades gently pressing back down. I told myself it was nonsense, as I had done 1,000 times before. At 9:15, Amelia Hawthorne arrived. Amelia, our newly appointed office transformation strategist, was all brisk steps and warm eyes, a woman in her 50s with a knack for noticing things others overlooked. She breezed in with her usual energy, shrugging off a plum-colored scarf that made her cheeks look rosy. "You're early again, Michael," she said, smiling as she settled her bag on her desk. "Old habits," I said. "Old habits," she echoed thoughtfully, and I caught a peculiar look in her eyes. Not judgment. Something else. Curiosity, perhaps. We had been working closely together for 3 months, ever since the company decided it needed to modernize its workflows, which was code for reorganizing nearly everything and everyone. I admired her, though I couldn't always keep up with her pace. She was kind, observant, and patient in a way that made me feel both seen and vulnerable. That morning she handed me a thick binder of redesign proposals. I pretended to read them, though my thoughts kept drifting back to the mirror, to that feeling. Around noon, Amelia invited me into her office. "Close the door, would you?" she asked gently. My heart skipped. Had I made a mistake in the scheduling logs? Had I misfiled an invoice? But no, her expression wasn't stern. It was soft, almost hesitant. "I want to ask you something," she began, folding her hands. "And I want you to know there's no judgment attached. None at all." I felt my palms grow damp. "All right," I managed. "When we talked last week about the new professional image standards," she continued, "I noticed you reacted strongly. Not negatively, just strongly. It's been on my mind." I remembered the meeting vividly. She had presented new dress code options, flexible, modern, inclusive. She spoke about authenticity and expression in the workplace. And I had felt something flutter inside me, something both frightening and familiar. "I suppose it was just unexpected," I said. "We've had the same policies for so long. And yet you seemed," she said carefully, relieved. "Almost hopeful. Am I wrong?" I swallowed. Hard. "No," I whispered, surprising myself. The room felt very quiet then. Amelia leaned back, her eyes warm, inviting. "If you'd ever like to talk about it," she said, "I'm here." Sometimes people carry stories for so long they forget they're holding them. Her words hit me with unexpected force. Something inside cracked, just a little, but enough for a sliver of light to break through. I nodded, unable to speak. And that was the moment, though I didn't know it then, when the transformation truly began. Not in a burst of revelation, but in a gentle, steady unfolding. A beginning shaped not by fear, but by the possibility of honesty. A possibility I had never permitted myself before. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake staring at the familiar cracks on my bedroom ceiling, tracing them the way some people trace constellations. My mind kept circling back to the conversation with Amelia, her gentle tone, the unspoken understanding in her eyes, the strange mix of fear and relief that had unfurled in my chest. It had been years since anyone had looked at me with that kind of perceptiveness, as if they could sense the quiet storm inside me. I told myself I was being dramatic. At my age, one tends to imagine meanings that aren't there. And yet, something had shifted. The air around me seemed thinner somehow, as if the walls I'd spent decades carefully maintaining had developed hairline fractures. The next morning at the office, I found a small envelope on my desk. My name, Michael, was written in Amelia's elegant handwriting. My heart thudded as I opened it. Inside was a simple note. If you still feel that weight you carried yesterday, come see me. No pressure. Just possibility. Possibility. The word both frightened and thrilled me. I tucked the note into my pocket and pretended to go about my usual routine, sorting mail, reviewing schedules, answering mundane emails about supply requests and printer issues. But the envelope might as well have been burning through the fabric of my trousers. Every so often my fingers brushed it, as if checking to see whether it remained real. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't stand the tension any longer. I walked to Amelia's office, but paused outside her door, suddenly overwhelmed by doubts. What exactly was I walking into? What would I even say? Would this conversation pull something loose inside me that I couldn't put back? Before I could talk myself out of it, the door opened. Amelia stood there, holding 2 mugs of tea. Her expression softened when she saw me. "I was hoping you'd come," she said. "You look like a man carrying more thoughts than he can manage alone." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the small seating area by the window. I nodded and followed her in. We sat across from each other, steam curling between us from the mugs. She took a slow sip before speaking. "I won't pry," she said gently. "But I've been doing this kind of work long enough to recognize when someone is standing on the edge of a very old truth." My throat tightened. I stared into my tea, watching the faint ripple where my trembling hand disturbed the surface. "I don't know where to begin," I finally whispered. "Begin anywhere," she said. "Sometimes the starting point doesn't matter as much as the courage to speak at all." I closed my eyes. The world felt terribly fragile. "When you showed those new dress code options," I said slowly, "I felt something I haven't felt in decades." "Which was?" she prompted softly. "Recognition," I whispered, surprising myself again. "And longing." A trembling breath escaped me. I braced myself for judgment, confusion, even pity. But Amelia only nodded, thoughtful and steady. "Tell me more," she said. "It's difficult to explain," I murmured. "All my life I've felt misaligned, I suppose. Like my reflection and my reality had an argument I could never resolve. I would see clothes, colors, styles meant for women, and something inside me would reach for them. Quietly, desperately, but I never allowed myself to actually reach." "Because?" she asked, her voice calm and warm. "Because I came from a generation where such things weren't. Well, they simply weren't done. Not if you wanted safety. Or acceptance. Or peace." I swallowed. And by the time the world began to soften, I had already hardened. Amelia's gaze didn't waver. "And now," I said, my voice unsteady, "I'm tired of hardening." She placed her mug down and leaned forward slightly. "Michael? Or perhaps that isn't the name you would choose for yourself if you could choose freely?" A tremor passed through me. A small, frightened part of me wanted to retreat, but another part, older, truer, rose to the surface. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I do know that the life I've been living feels smaller than the life I've been yearning for." She nodded again, gently, as if she'd expected exactly that answer. "Then," she said softly, "let's explore that yearning. Together. Slowly. Safely. No rushing. No pressure. Just possibility." That word again. Possibility. I felt something warm spread through me, fragile and tender, like a seed finally touching sunlight. I don't know where this will lead, I whispered. You don't have to know, she said. You only have to allow yourself to take the first step. And in that quiet office, with the muffled bustle of the workplace beyond the door, I realized I had already taken it. The following week moved with a strange mixture of heaviness and buoyancy, as though each day carried both the weight of decades and the lift of new beginnings. I found myself paying closer attention to moments I had once ignored, the way certain fabrics draped on the mannequins in the shop windows I passed on my walk to work, the soft pastel hues of scarves worn by commuters, the graceful way Amelia tied her hair back with a simple clip. These were details I had always noticed in a quiet, private way, but now they seemed to shimmer with a kind of invitation. Still, I told no one else. Not yet. It felt too delicate, like holding a small bird in cupped hands. One afternoon, as the office settled into its usual midday lull, Amelia approached my desk with a gentle smile. Have you got a moment? I'd like to show you something. A familiar flutter moved through my chest, a blend of nervousness and anticipation. I followed her to one of the unused conference rooms, the kind reserved for meetings that never quite materialized. When she closed the door behind us, I noticed a small box sitting on the table. She gestured for me to sit. I want to be very clear, she began, lowering herself into the chair across from me. You are under no obligation to open this. It is simply something I thought might help you explore those possibilities we talked about. I stared at the box. It wasn't large, perhaps the size of 2 stacked paperback novels, wrapped in simple brown paper and tied with a soft silver ribbon. My voice felt caught somewhere between my throat and my ribs. May I ask what's inside? You may, she said, though she didn't offer the answer. But sometimes the asking is more frightening than the opening. A small laugh escaped me despite the tension. You're very good at this, you know. I've had many years to learn how to listen, she replied quietly. Most people don't lack answers. They simply lack a safe place to speak them. I looked down at my hands. They rested on the table, fingers lightly trembling. How strange, to be in my 60s and feel as unsure as I had at 16. Yet there was a tenderness to it as well, a reminder that discovery did not belong only to the young. After a long moment, I reached for the box. My fingers hesitated on the ribbon before pulling gently. The silver thread fell away, and I peeled back the brown paper. Inside the box lay a neatly folded piece of soft fabric. Pale blue. Light enough to almost glow. My breath caught. It's just a scarf, Amelia said softly, anticipating my racing thoughts. A gentle step. Nothing more. It's a color I thought might suit you. I touched the fabric. It was smooth, cool at first, but warmed quickly beneath my fingertips. I lifted it and let it unfurl, the delicate material whispering as it slid through my hands. I had admired scarves like this from afar for as long as I could remember, yet I had never dared to hold one, let alone imagine it against my own skin. It's beautiful, I murmured. So, are the parts of you it speaks to, she replied. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I swallowed hard, blinking back the unexpected sting of emotion. I don't know if I'm ready for more than this, I confessed. You don't need more than this, she said gently. Small steps create big truths over time. You're allowed to move at your own pace. I draped the scarf loosely over my hands, not yet over my shoulders. Even that felt monumental. What if this is foolish? I whispered. Then it's the bravest foolishness I've ever seen, she said with a soft smile. But I don't think it's foolish at all. I think it's honest. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw not just a colleague but a companion in a moment I had never imagined sharing with someone else. She wasn't amused or curious for curiosity's sake. She was present, steady, unwavering. I'm scared, I said quietly. I know, she replied, but you're also finally listening to parts of yourself that have waited a very long time to be heard. The hum of the office outside continued, oblivious to the small, profound moment unfolding behind the closed door. I held the scarf gently, almost reverently, realizing it represented more than a piece of fabric. It was a symbol of permission, permission I had never granted myself. "Thank you," I whispered. The words felt too small for the gratitude I felt, but they were all I had. "You don't owe me thanks," she said. "Just trust yourself a little more each day." A small, fragile warmth settled in my chest. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I was no longer walking toward it alone. I kept the scarf tucked safely inside my briefcase for nearly a week before finding the courage to do anything more with it. Every morning, I would open the case to retrieve my planner or my glasses, and the soft blue fabric would catch my eye like a quiet whisper. It made my heart race, not with fear exactly, but with a tender sort of anticipation I wasn't accustomed to feeling at my age. One evening, after the office had emptied and the city outside had begun its slow descent into dusk, I lingered at my desk longer than usual. The scarf lay folded before me, its pale color glowing faintly under the warm lamplight. I glanced at the door, ensuring I was alone, and then lifted the fabric with cautious hands. Just for a moment, I told myself. Just a small step. I slipped the scarf gently around my neck. The sensation was startlingly emotional, far more than I had expected. The soft weight of it rested against my collarbone, familiar and foreign all at once. In the reflection of the window, I saw a version of myself I hadn't allowed to surface since youth. Gentler, quieter, more aligned. Not transformed, but opening. I stood there for several minutes, unable to move, breathing slowly as my heart settled into a fragile but genuine calm. I didn't hear Amelia approach until she spoke. "It suits you," she said softly from the doorway. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My hands flew to the scarf, half in panic, half in instinct. I didn't hear you," I stammered. "That's all right," she said, stepping into the room with a calm quietness that matched the dim evening light. "I wasn't trying to startle you." My cheeks burned. "I wasn't. I didn't mean to." "You don't need to apologize," she said firmly but gently. I froze, hands still half raised at my neck. She walked closer, her steps measured and unthreatening. "If anything," she said, "you should be proud." This moment took courage. "I'm not sure it's courage," I murmured. "Then it's honesty," she said. "And honesty takes its own kind of bravery." I let my hands fall slowly. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, but beneath the embarrassment lay something steadier, a growing sense of safety I hadn't felt in years. Amelia studied me quietly for a moment, not with scrutiny, but with a kind of thoughtful gentleness. "Do you feel all right?" she asked. I swallowed. "I think so." "Lightheaded?" she asked with a small, knowing smile. I managed a shaky laugh. "A bit." "That's normal," she said. "It's a lot to step toward yourself after spending so long stepping away." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. I had never thought of it that way. She motioned toward the window. "Look at yourself one more time," she encouraged. "Not to judge, just to see." I hesitated, then turned to face the faint reflection again. The man I'd seen every day for over 60 years was still there, lined face, tired eyes, familiar posture. But there was something new too. Something gentler. Something truer. A softness that had always lived inside me, but had never been allowed a place in the open. I paused, searching for the word. "More like you," Amelia supplied gently. A breath caught in my chest. I nodded. "Yes." She smiled, a warm, proud smile that reached her eyes. "Then that's what matters." I stood there for another quiet moment, letting the truth settle deep inside me, like a stone finally finding its place on the riverbed. Eventually, I removed the scarf and folded it again. This time, though, I didn't hide it. I set it on my desk with deliberate care, as though acknowledging its place in my life. "Thank you," I said again, my voice steadier than before. Amelia touched my arm lightly, a reassuring, grounding gesture. "You're doing beautifully," she whispered. As we walked out of the office together, locking the doors behind us, I felt lighter than I had in years, as though a chapter I'd never been brave enough to open had finally begun, quietly, softly, but unmistakably. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of excitement for what might come next. The days that followed felt different, not dramatically, not in ways anyone else would have noticed, but in subtle shifts that moved like a gentle tide inside me. The scarf sat on my dresser at home now, no longer hidden away in a drawer or briefcase. Each morning, when I passed it on my way to the kitchen, the soft blue caught the light and seemed to offer a quiet invitation. I wasn't ready to wear it outside my flat, not yet, but knowing it was there, visible, acknowledged, felt like breathing a little easier. At work, Amelia continued to treat me with the same kindness and quiet understanding as always, never pressing, never coaxing, simply making space for me to step forward at my own pace. It was a strange comfort, like walking beside someone who didn't need to speak to make you feel safe. One Thursday afternoon, she approached my desk with a small clipboard and a thoughtful expression. "We're rearranging the storage room today," she said. "Well, attempting to. Would you mind giving me a hand? I could use someone with patience and organizational skills." I chuckled. "Is that your polite way of saying you need someone who won't run off halfway through?" Her smile widened. "Exactly." I followed her down the hall to the storage room, the place where decades of outdated binders, forgotten marketing samples, and unloved office furniture lived in quiet retirement. The room smelled faintly of dust and old paper, and the overhead light flickered once before settling into a steady glow. "What's the plan?" I asked. "First," she said, "we take everything off the shelves. Then we categorize. Then we decide what still has value." I raised an eyebrow. "Is this a metaphor?" She smirked. "Not intentionally, but now that you mention it." We began the slow process of unpacking boxes and sorting piles. It was tedious work, but comfortable, the kind of shared task that made quiet conversation feel natural. As we worked, she asked about my early years at the company, and I found myself reminiscing aloud in ways I hadn't done in ages. Stories from my 30s and 40s resurfaced, moments I had tucked away like old files, and she listened with genuine interest. As we reached the back wall, we came across a dusty old mirror leaning behind a file cabinet. The frame was chipped but sturdy. Amelia said, lifting it carefully. "This must have been from the reception remodel in '98. I remembered it faintly, how visitors used to check their appearance in it before meeting with partners." Amelia propped it against a shelf, dusting it lightly with her sleeve. She caught me glancing at it and paused. "Do you want to take a moment?" she asked softly. A nervous flutter tightened my chest. "Here. Only if you want to," she said. "There's no pressure. But sometimes reflection helps us understand where we are on the path." The room felt suddenly too quiet. I wasn't sure I was ready for this. Not here. Not in a storage room full of clutter and ghosts of office decades past. But something inside me nudged forward. "I suppose," I murmured. I stepped toward the mirror. My reflection stared back, older, lined, familiar in ways both comforting and limiting. I straightened my posture, then hesitated. Amelia approached slowly and held out the scarf. "You brought it," I said, surprised. "I thought you might want it today," she replied. "But if not, we'll just fold it back up. No harm done." My fingers curled around the fabric before I had time to think. The softness steadied me. With a slow breath, I draped the scarf around my neck, not fully, just enough to feel its presence. Enough to feel the slight shift it created in how I saw myself. The mirror reflected not a transformation, but a beginning. A quiet, steady beginning. I started, then faltered. Amelia stepped beside me, her voice warm. "You look more at ease," she said. "That's the first sign of truth showing itself." My throat tightened. "It's strange," I admitted, "seeing myself this way. Strange, but right somehow. As though part of me has been waiting to catch up." She nodded. Self-recognition can be unsettling, especially when it's long overdue. I stared at my reflection, feeling something shift, a small, profound settling, like a puzzle piece finally finding its place after being carried loose for years. A quiet moment passed before I spoke again. "I don't know who I'm becoming," I said softly, "but I think I'm starting to understand who I've always been." Amelia's smile was gentle, proud, almost maternal. "That's the essence of any real transformation," she said. "Not becoming someone new. Becoming someone true." I let out a shaky breath, overcome by the simplicity and truth of her words. The mirror had shown me something I couldn't unsee now. Something I no longer wanted to hide from. I didn't realize how much that moment in the storage room would echo through the days that followed. It was as if something inside me had gently clicked into place. Not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden revelation, but a subtle internal alignment I hadn't known I needed. I found myself moving a little differently, thinking a little differently, even breathing a little differently, as though a tightness around my ribs had loosened at last. The scarf remained with me each day, though I still only wore it privately. I would place it around my neck for a few quiet minutes each morning before leaving the flat, letting it remind me of who I was becoming, or perhaps who I'd always been beneath the surface. Then I would fold it, tuck it gently into my bag, and step out into the world. One particularly cold morning, I arrived early at the office. The sky outside was still deep blue, caught between night and dawn, and the building was silent. As I walked in, I noticed a soft light glowing from Amelia's office. She was already there, wrapped in a dark green cardigan, sipping tea as she flipped through a set of design blueprints. When she heard my footsteps, she looked up with a warm smile. "You're early," she said. "Earlier than usual." "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. She studied me for a moment, then gestured to the chair across from her. "Tea." I nodded gratefully. She poured me a cup and slid it across the desk. "What's on your mind today?" she asked gently. I hesitated, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "It's difficult to explain." "I have time," she said softly. I took a slow sip of tea, trying to steady my thoughts. Since that day in the storage room, I've been feeling more aware of myself, more connected, but also more frightened. "What frightens you?" she asked. "That I've spent so much of my life not knowing how to name myself," I said. "And that now, so late, I'm not sure how to begin." She nodded thoughtfully. "Discovering parts of ourselves later in life isn't a failure," she said. "It's actually one of the most courageous acts of living. Most people never dare to look inward at all." I let out a shaky breath. "Sometimes it feels like I've wasted so much time." "That's a story you're telling yourself," she replied gently. "And stories can be rewritten. You're here now. You're opening. That's not wasted time. That's reclaimed time." Her words settled into me like warm embers. After a quiet moment, she leaned slightly forward. "I'd like to suggest something. Only if you're comfortable, of course." My pulse quickened, though I didn't feel threatened. "What is it?" "There's a small office makeover initiative happening this month," she explained. "A program aimed at encouraging staff to express themselves through color, comfort, and individuality. I'm overseeing it, naturally. And I thought perhaps you might like to participate. In a small way." I blinked at her. "Me?" "Only if you choose to," she emphasized. "It doesn't have to be anything bold. It could be as simple as choosing a color you feel drawn to. A notebook, a pen, a little desk accessory. Something that whispers rather than shouts. Something that's yours." I stared into my tea, letting her suggestion sink in. The idea was small on the surface, just a color, just an object, but to me it felt like dipping a toe into open waters. "A color," I repeated softly. "What color feels like you?" she asked. "Not what you think you should choose. What you want to choose." My mind drifted instinctively to the soft blue of the scarf. When I didn't answer right away, she smiled knowingly. "If you'd like, we could go choose something together over lunch." A nervous warmth spread through me. The idea felt monumental and gentle all at once. But before I could respond, the office lights flickered on throughout the building, signaling the approach of the rest of the staff. The quiet moment between us shifted back into the normal rhythm of the workday. "Think about it," she said as she stood. "You don't have to decide now." But I already knew, somewhere deep inside me, that I wanted to say yes. Later that afternoon, as I sorted through supply orders, Amelia passed by my desk and paused. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She just gave me a look, warm and steady, the kind that made me feel like I wasn't walking blind. And I realized, perhaps for the first time, that I didn't have to navigate this alone. My steps could be small. My pace could be slow. My fears could accompany me without stopping me. For the first time in decades, my future felt less like a narrowing corridor and more like a door quietly opening. The day Amelia and I finally went to choose something for the office makeover, I felt an unexpected flutter of nerves, almost like a first date, though this wasn't romance. It was something quieter, deeper, a shared journey that had nothing to do with courtship and everything to do with companionship and courage. We left the building just after noon, stepping into the brisk midday air. The sky was pale and wintry, the kind of soft gray that made colors seem somehow more vivid. Amelia walked beside me, not rushing, matching my pace in a way that felt both considerate and grounding. "There's a little shop around the corner," she said. "Locally owned. They carry things you won't find in big stores, pieces with personality." I chuckled nervously. Personality. That's a tall order for a desk accessory. "Not if you choose something that speaks," she replied with a smile. Her confidence made me breathe a little easier. When we entered the shop, a quiet, cozy place filled with decorative stationery, handmade mugs, small potted plants, and colorful fabrics, I felt as though I'd stepped into someone's carefully tended garden. Soft music played from a radio in the corner, and the scent of lavender drifted from a display of candles. "Take your time," Amelia said. "Just look. Notice what draws you in." I wandered slowly, hands clasped behind my back, pretending to study the shelves while my heart raced. I wasn't used to choosing things for myself, certainly not things that represented who I was inside. My life had been built on practicality and understatement, not preference. But then I saw it. A small ceramic pen holder, its glaze a soft, serene blue, the same shade as the scarf. I felt something in my chest stir, like a quiet affirmation. Tentatively, I reached out and touched it. The surface was smooth, cool, and simple, but beautiful in a way that seemed to hum with familiarity. "You found something," Amelia said gently from behind me. I turned, half embarrassed, half proud. "I think so." She stepped closer, examining it with a discerning eye. "It's perfect," she said. "Calm. Gentle. Understated, but unmistakably yours." I held it carefully, feeling its weight. "I didn't expect it to feel like this," I admitted. "Like choosing a color is choosing a voice." "It is," she said softly. "Just a quiet one." We brought the pen holder to the register, and I paid for it before I could second-guess myself. Amelia didn't hover or guide. She simply stood beside me, steady and present. For that, I felt a swell of gratitude too deep to articulate. On the walk back to the office, she glanced at me, eyes warm. "How do you feel?" I thought for a moment. "Lighter," I said, "and a bit more myself. Whoever that is." "Whoever that is," she echoed with a nod. "You're allowed to discover at your own pace." When we returned to my desk, I set the pen holder down carefully, almost ceremoniously. It looked small and delicate among the black staplers and gray file trays, but it didn't look out of place. In fact, it seemed to shift the whole desk gently around it, like a drop of color spreading through clear water. Throughout the afternoon, I kept glancing at it, unable to stop. It wasn't about the object itself. It was what it represented, a step taken, a truth acknowledged, a sliver of authenticity brought into the open. As the workday drew to a close, I felt Amelia's presence beside me. When I looked up, she was smiling. "May I?" she asked, reaching toward the pen holder. "Of course." She lifted it briefly, examined it, then set it back down with great care. "It suits you," she said softly, "more than you realize." I felt a warmth rise behind my eyes. Not sadness, recognition, relief. Something tender and overdue. "Thank you," I said again, though the words felt inadequate. "Thank yourself," she replied. "You're the one who chose it." When I returned home that evening, I took out the scarf and placed it over my shoulders as I stood before the mirror. Not as a disguise. Not as a fantasy. simply as a truth I was learning to honor. The blue of the scarf and the blue of the pen holder felt connected somehow, two small pieces of a much larger whole gently coming into view. And for the first time, I felt a quiet certainty that I wasn't just stepping into change. I was stepping into myself. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm that felt both strange and comforting. Every day, I allowed myself a few small acts of recognition. The scarf became part of my morning routine, draped around my shoulders for a quiet moment of reflection before leaving the flat. The pen holder sat proudly on my desk at work, a subtle affirmation that I could claim space for myself, even in a world that had long seemed indifferent to the deeper parts of who I was. Amelia remained a steady presence, offering guidance without pressure, support without expectation. Our interactions were never hurried. They were patient and deliberate, like watching a garden grow. She introduced me to simple ways to express myself at work, a soft, pastel notebook, a subtly patterned desk mat, and I embraced each small choice with a growing sense of pride. One rainy Thursday, as the office hummed with the usual low murmur of activity, Amelia knocked gently on my office door. I looked up from a stack of files, surprised by her presence. "I have something to show you," she said, holding a small bundle carefully in her hands. "What is it?" I asked, curiosity piqued. "Nothing complicated," she replied. "Just an idea, something to help you explore your style more fully." She unfolded the bundle, revealing a neatly folded blouse in soft lavender. The color was gentle, understated, and immediately drew me in. My fingers brushed the fabric lightly, almost reverently. "It's beautiful," I said, breath catching. "But I don't know if I can." "Only if you want to," Amelia said softly. "No one else needs to see it. Not yet. It's about feeling it first." I held the blouse closer, imagining it against my skin. It was a strange, almost dizzying sensation, a mix of fear, anticipation, and excitement that I hadn't experienced in decades. For a long moment, I simply inhaled its scent, the soft cotton mingling with faint traces of the lavender shop where she had acquired it. "I feel nervous," I admitted quietly. "And guilty, perhaps, for wanting this." "That's understandable," she said, her voice calm and grounding. "Most people in your position would feel the same. But wanting isn't wrong. It's human. It's part of discovering yourself." Her reassurance settled over me like sunlight breaking through clouds. Slowly, I unbuttoned the blouse from its hanger and held it against my chest. The fabric was light, almost like a whisper against my skin. I didn't wear it yet. Not fully. But I felt the stirrings of a deeper alignment. "You're doing wonderfully," Amelia said. "Notice how your body responds. Notice the small shift inside you. That's the beginning of acceptance." I nodded, allowing myself to feel it, the thrill, the warmth, the quiet liberation. I realized then that these small steps were more than symbolic. They were real, tangible acts of embracing myself, piece by piece, fabric by fabric, truth by truth. As the afternoon wore on, I left the blouse folded carefully on my chair, promising myself I would return to it. And when I finally left the office that evening, scarf around my shoulders, pen holder in place, I felt a gentle but persistent sense of anticipation, a feeling that my life, even now, could hold surprises, joys, and discoveries I had never allowed myself to imagine. Walking home in the soft drizzle, I thought about how long I had spent hiding, conforming, and silencing the quieter parts of myself. And for the first time in decades, I felt a quiet, steady certainty that the journey was mine to take and that it was far from over. The days turned into weeks, and each day brought small, deliberate moments of transformation. Nothing dramatic happened overnight, yet every small step felt monumental. The scarf, the pen holder, the blouse, they were more than objects. They were markers of a journey I had finally allowed myself to take. One morning, Amelia invited me to a small workshop she was hosting for the office Makeover initiative. The idea was simple: a private space for staff to explore color, texture, and personal expression. Attendance was optional, and I almost hesitated to go. But the thought of standing still in my own truth, even among others, felt important. When I arrived, the room was softly lit, with tables scattered with colorful fabrics, notebooks, and small decorative objects. Amelia greeted me warmly, her presence as steady as ever. "Just explore," she said gently. "No expectations. No pressure. Only notice what draws your attention." I wandered slowly, letting my hands hover over the fabrics. I lingered on pastel shades, soft textures, and subtle patterns. Each item seemed to whisper something I had long ignored: permission, acknowledgement, a quiet welcome to parts of myself I had denied for decades. At one table, I found a silk scarf in a muted lavender, almost identical in tone to the blouse Amelia had given me. The sight of it made my chest tighten, an unfamiliar, thrilling ache that I hadn't known I could feel. I lifted it carefully, letting the fabric slide between my fingers. "You've found it," Amelia said softly, appearing beside me. "It feels right," I whispered, unable to do more than trace the scarf's edges. "Then trust that feeling," she said. "The world may have rules, but this, what you feel inside, is yours." I folded the scarf and held it against my chest, imagining myself wearing it one day. A part of me, a quiet, timid part, wanted to step back, to retreat to the safety of conformity. But another part, older and wiser, whispered, "This is the truth you've been seeking. The life you've longed for is not too late." By the end of the session, I had chosen a small ensemble: the lavender blouse, the scarf, and a delicate notebook in pale blue. None of it was loud or flamboyant. None of it was meant to attract attention. It was simply a tangible acknowledgement of myself, my tastes, my identity, my quiet courage. When we walked back to our desks, Amelia gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. "You've taken a significant step today," she said, "even if it feels small." I felt a wave of gratitude, not just for her, but for the realization that at my age, life could still hold discovery, liberation, and joy. The fear of judgment still lingered, but it no longer controlled me. That evening, I returned home and carefully tried on the blouse and scarf, standing before my mirror. For the first time, I saw a reflection that felt coherent, aligned. It wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about letting myself exist fully, tenderly, and without apology. I ran my fingers along the soft fabric, smiling quietly at the reflection. Decades of self-restraint, fear, and denial had not disappeared, but they had softened. And in their place was something new: clarity, peace, and a subtle but undeniable joy. I realized then that the journey would continue, not with grand leaps, but with steady, careful steps. And that was enough. More than enough. The following weeks unfolded like a quiet symphony. Each morning, I draped the scarf gently over my shoulders, settled the blouse neatly on my chair, and placed the pen holder precisely on my desk. These small, deliberate acts had become rituals, each one a reminder that I was reclaiming parts of myself I had long ignored. Amelia remained a steady presence, never intrusive, always encouraging. There was an unspoken rhythm to our interactions now, a trust that had grown between us over shared, quiet moments, gentle guidance, and a patient acknowledgement of my pace. She never pushed me to do more than I was ready for, yet somehow, her confidence in me gave me courage I hadn't known I possessed. One afternoon, as the office emptied and the sun cast a soft amber light across the hall, Amelia invited me into her office. She held a small box, similar to the first one she had given me, but this one felt heavier, with anticipation, possibility, and reassurance. "I thought it might be time," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine with warmth. "Time to see just how far you've come." I swallowed, my chest tight. I don't know if I'm ready." "You are," she said firmly, but gently. "I can see it. And if you're not, we can wait. No one else needs to know. This is for you." With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside was a full outfit, a carefully coordinated ensemble in soft pastels, blending the lavender and blue that had already become familiar to me. The blouse, the scarf, a skirt of gentle gray, and a delicate cardigan. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to be noticed. It was meant to be worn by someone who had waited decades to see themselves clearly. "I can't believe I'm considering this," I whispered. "You've already been wearing parts of it in spirit," Amelia said. "Now it's just the final layer, the acknowledgement you've earned." I closed my eyes for a long moment, feeling the years of hesitation, fear, and conformity fall away like dust from old furniture. Then, slowly, deliberately, I began to change into the outfit. The fabric felt soft and familiar, yet wholly new. With each piece I added, I felt a quiet transformation, not just of appearance, but of self. A long-hidden alignment, decades in the making, was finally visible to me. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I recognized, someone I had always been, but whom the world had never allowed me to fully reveal. It was neither shocking nor sudden. It was inevitable, natural, and profoundly freeing. Amelia stood behind me, smiling quietly. "You look right," she said simply. "And more importantly, you feel right, don't you?" I nodded, tears welling unexpectedly. "I do. I feel at home in myself, for the first time in decades." We spent a few quiet moments there, neither of us needing to speak. The office around us hummed faintly, indifferent to the quiet revolution that had taken place in a single corner. And in that silence, I realized something I had never truly allowed myself to believe. It is never too late to discover who you are, to embrace your truth, and to live with authenticity. From that day forward, each choice I made, no matter how small, was infused with intention. The scarf draped over my shoulders, the pen holder on my desk, the blouse I chose in the morning, they were more than objects. They were affirmations, markers of a life reclaimed. I had spent decades shaping myself to fit a world that demanded conformity. And yet, in my 60s, I finally discovered the quiet joy of living for myself, of acknowledging my truth, step by step, fabric by fabric, moment by moment. Amelia never stopped being my guide, my steady presence, and my witness. But the transformation, the liberation, the authenticity, the courage, was entirely mine. And as I left the office that evening, the sunset catching the soft folds of the scarf around my shoulders, I realized with a profound and gentle certainty, this was not an ending. It was the beginning of a life fully, unapologetically my own. The journey was far from over. And for the first time in decades, I could not wait to see where it would take me. The office lights dimmed behind me, the city stretched endlessly beyond the windows, and I walked forward with a quiet smile, finally, fully, at peace with who I was.